Our next speaker is from the Law University of Hyderabad in India and NUI Galway. Gábor Gombos is an Adjunct Professor, and the title of the paper to present to us is "The Future Belongs to Emancipatory Research." So the floor is now yours, Gábor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be a panelist here in the European Parliament. May I add to the introduction that I am also a person diagnosed with mental illness who often faces barriers in full and equal participation. That is, I am a person with psychosocial disability, and I had the privilege to serve on the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in the UN in that capacity. When Gerard asked me to talk about the future belongs to emancipatory research, then my mathematics background came into my mind, and what I will attempt to do in these 10 minutes is first to try to outline how I would give a proof, a more or less formal proof, that this is the case. The future belongs to emancipatory research. And then I will identify 4 or 5 areas where, in my opinion, backed by my experience as a former member of the UN Committee, desperately needed this emancipatory research. Let me start with saying that the CRPD has moved disability discourse of state interventions from welfare to human rights. I think there is no doubt about that. Everybody knows that this is the case. We also know that the interventions have not yet fully moved. We are not fully there yet. We are moving towards changing our approach on policies, programs, and legislation from welfare to human rights. Before the CRPD, most disability policies were, and many of them are still, in force, so they have been largely professional expertise driven. This is not to say that there were no countries, and Europe is a proud region where in relatively many member states of the European Union and beyond, these policies were constructed in consultation with DPOs. I am not denying that. But just consulting DPOs does not really mean that the policy making is driven by the expertise, which is the expertise of persons with disabilities themselves. Experiential knowledge and the power which should come from that had only marginal contribution, and often such knowledge was not even recognized as real knowledge. Using the, I think, very fruitful framework by Iris Marion Young, who worked on the phases of oppression, we can say that cultural imperialization of disability knowledge has contributed to barriers to full and effective participation. Let me just tell you one concrete example to that. Persons with psychosocial disabilities, using the medical old-fashioned terminology, mentally ill people. The knowledge which inputted policy discourses have been almost exclusively driven by the psychiatric knowledge, which is absolutely impairment-based, and it's about the incapacity of persons who are diagnosed with a major mental illness. And this psychiatric knowledge actually supported legal institutions which are in contradiction to the CRPD, like legal incapacitation, depriving persons of their right to legal capacity to make their own decisions, etc. So it's not only that there was no possibility for effective removal of the existing barriers because of the lack of driving force coming from experiential knowledge, but new barriers emerged from the cultural imperialization. But we also know that the negotiations of the CRPD and their outcome, the text and hopefully the spirit of the CRPD, really brought reflected experiential knowledge into the forefront. And I emphasize that it's not only experiential knowledge, it's a reflected experiential knowledge. It's much more than anecdotal experiential knowledge. And I think the really unique feature for those of us who had the privilege to participate in those negotiations was that the very intense and not easy deliberations between state delegations, bureaucrats, and DPO experts, experiential experts, and academics with disability expertise and without, these really helped us, experts with disabilities, reflect on the knowledge we have, which is the very first step necessary towards creating a real academic knowledge based on our experiences. The implementation of the CRPD does require new knowledge. I think that MEPs who are here in this room are very well aware how big a challenge the implementation, the full implementation of the CRPD is at the European level and the member state level and globally everywhere. Because much of the knowledge which is necessary for such an effective implementation is not yet there. It's not yet there in the academia, it's not yet there in the sources who have been used as experts by the policymakers. Very often, it is there in the experiences of persons with disabilities. But we have to make this knowledge into a systematic, if you like, scholarly, scientific knowledge in the positive world. Such new knowledge, consequently, should shift from the outsider's views on impairments towards the lived realities of persons with disabilities. Why human rights approach is really fundamental. A legal scholar, legal philosopher scholar said that claiming rights basically means that we elaborate social guarantees for the actual enjoyment of the right's substance against standard threats. So it's a deep concept, we have no time to elaborate on that. The important thing is that the CRPD really demands that when we think about what standard threats the substance of basic rights are having in our communities, barriers, inaccessibility, non-recognition of the capacities of persons with disabilities are all part of that, important part of that. To realize the objectives of the CRPD, further research is necessary, which will essentially utilize the lived experiences. Such research shall inform the political processes. Why is it important? If we really take it seriously, that the discourses have moved away from a welfare approach to a human rights approach, then, because of the nature of rights, we have to have political processes in place to elaborate on those social, political processes which will guarantee the framework for those guarantees. It's a political enterprise. It's an enterprise with the potential of empowerment. Hence, such research, when it is, important addition to say, when it is constructed in a renegotiated, in a rethought social and material relationship, has huge emancipatory potential. And may I also refer to my colleague, Anna has also made this in her intervention. Emancipatory research is not a method. Emancipatory research is not just a participatory research. Emancipatory research aims at the empowerment of persons with disabilities, to facilitate such empowerment. And I think that this is an outline for a proof of this statement. Very briefly, a few areas where such emancipatory research is desperately needed, in my opinion. All the issues experienced by persons with psychosocial disabilities. Psychiatry has monopolized the area, and we simply do not understand, what accessibility means for people with psychosocial disabilities. We desperately need emancipatory research on that. I submit a hypothesis that legal capacity, actually, the non-recognition of what is a major barrier to accessibility by persons with psychosocial disabilities. And yet, very few of us have thought of legal capacity as an accessibility issue. And when European and national policies are planned about removing barriers and making societies accessible, if we forget about that component, if we isolate legal capacity as separate grounds, then we will miss out the implementation of the CRPD for a large population, or population of persons with psychosocial disabilities. Another important area is how to combat intersectionality, multiple discrimination, which is a non-additive discrimination. People with disabilities may belong to several oppressed groups, and some forms of discrimination cannot be simply calculated by adding the discrimination on one ground plus the discrimination experience on the other grounds. The net discrimination may be a qualitatively new thing. While several national legislations like the UK Equal Treatment Act recognize the existence of such intersectionality, it would not give a really good answer how to address this issue, because simply some knowledge is not yet there. I submit that further emancipatory research is needed in that area. Political participation, not only in big politics, but in local politics, in DPOs, etc., by people with intellectual disabilities. Huge challenge, further knowledge is very much necessary. Emancipatory also with a lead role by experts with intellectual disabilities. Poverty. For a long time we believed that poverty and its interaction with disability is an issue for the developing countries, and we are, in Europe, developed world. No. We had to learn painfully that poverty and disability and the interaction of the two is very much, should be very much on the policy agendas. More understanding, more knowledge should come in that area. And finally, still existing barriers to deinstitutionalization and the phenomenon of trans-institutionalization, when certain populations of people with disabilities who are deinstitutionalized from their disability institutions find themselves in other institutions, prisons, elderly homes, and the like. Again, without emancipatory research in that field, I am a little bit skeptical if we can really combat these phenomena. Thank you very much.